I call Paul Foster Bell.
Mangai o te whare tuarua Māori ora. E ngā mema o te ropu repa, kia ora tātou. E ngā mema o te ropu kakariki, tēnā korua. E ngā mema o te ropu Aotearoa tuatahi, kia ora, tēnā korua. Mr. Speaker, in taking a brief call on this Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust's Amendment Bill in the second reading debate, I want to actually agree with all that has been said by the members who have spoken so far. It's a wonderful thing, particularly in this week when we started with some discord on the passage of legislation which is relevant to iwi Māori in this country, that we have managed to come together and put aside some of the game playing that has been undertaken by certain parties in this House, which need not be named on this happy occasion. And in fact, progress this piece of legislation which does much good, which modernises an obsolete piece of legislation, updates it for the circumstances of the modern world, and gives the Trust Board the flexibility to operate in a way which maximises the benefit accruing to the people, particularly of the Wairarapa, but to Māori people actually throughout New Zealand. Sir, this bill does a number of very practical things. It reforms the governance arrangements of the Trust Board so that half the Board of 8 will be appointed by the local iwi. The other half will be appointed by His Grace the Bishop of Te Upoko o Maui, or the Anglican primate of this region in which we are currently standing. Sir, the whakapapa relationship of certain members in this House with the marae in question have been raised. So far be it from me to fail to follow that precedent. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I whakapapa to the very far north, Te Tai Tokerau, ko Ngāti Kahu ki whangaroa te iwi, ko o Tangaroa te marae, and my ancestor was same as the leader of the Māori Party, Te Ururoa Flavel, his eponymous ancestor, the chief Te Ururoa, the paramount chief of Ngāti Kahu at the very start of the 19th century, also the famous victor of the Battle of Kororareka, who made some significant progression south on his raids. I'm not quite sure if he got as far as the Wairarapa, but you never know, there may be some very distant cousins present in that situation. So my whakapapa is somewhat more tenuous than that of others, than that of my colleagues and members opposite. I am Ngāti Kahu, not Ngāti Kahununu, so can't claim that direct connection, but any intelligent person, sir, in reading this legislation sees the benefit that will accrue to Ngāti Kahununu and others who benefit from the use of the land. I just want to comment on a theme that has been raised, I think, particularly eloquently by the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, which is that times have changed and that the assets of the Trust Board can be put to more productive and more lucrative use for the benefit of the beneficiaries of the Trust than people would have imagined back in 1932 when the schoolhouse burnt down, or even 1943 in the midst of the Second World War when the legislation was most recently updated. You can imagine in a wonderful area like the Wairarapa, which is so ably represented by my distinguished colleague Alistair Scott as its local member, you can imagine the kinds of industries which may now actually be the most prosperous and lucrative. Perhaps wine growing is for export is a good industry to be in. Maybe high tech. The lands could be used to perhaps house cloud-based service systems and offering those services all around the world, things that people back in the 1940s couldn't possibly have imagined. So I commend that particular aspect of the bill as being incredibly positive. Sir, as other members have stated, this bill has had thorough but not slow consideration by the Māori Affairs Select Committee, ably chaired by its wonderful chairman, Te Haunuku Korako, my distinguished colleague of noble heritage and who bears that proud name and does so much good work on the Māori Affairs Committee in such a consensual way with its deputy chair and with other members of the with Peter Paroni, who also is a very hard-working member of that committee when his leader allows him to participate. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill has been through the Select Committee process, and as others have commented, that old saying applies that if there isn't too much interest, if there aren't people coming in to submit, it must actually be a pretty good piece of legislation. You generally only get a huge queue, a horde of submitters coming in to petition their case when there are flaws with the legislation. So I think that is hugely positive, and it is a huge credit to Nukorako, his committee, and all of those who have played a part, including the Parliamentary Council and others who have contributed to the fine-tuning of this piece of legislation. Sir, it would be remiss of me not to comment on the very nature of this bill. This is a private bill. It's actually a relatively rare and obscure form of legislative instrument that we see in this House. It is the rarest form of bill that comes here. Government bills, of course, being the most common. We do see members' bills drawn regularly, and we'll be dealing with some of those later today. We have local bills, and local bills are not entirely uncommon. We've had several through this year, but private bills are relatively rare. We dealt with the Royal Foundation for the Blind repeal, and actually that organisation transitioned into being just a conventional trust like any other charity or NGO. But it is appropriate that this bill is that this organisation, that these trusts, given their heritage, given the conditions that prevail in the area, it is appropriate that we don't just simply repeal the previous piece of legislation as we're doing with 124 other pieces of legislation in the Statutes Repeal Bill. It is appropriate that it's modernised, it's brought up to date, it's made fit for purpose, and it's done so in this way as a private bill in the name of Alistair Scott. And I will really want to commend Alistair Scott. He is both a strong local member, but someone who clearly wants to support these institutions that do a lot of good in his own community. Without much further ado, actually there's one more point I would like to make, and it is quite an important one, that this bill should be enacted. The committee recommends that this bill be enacted in Te Reo Māori as well as English. Now, we had quite an historical event earlier this year when the Te Reo Māori language bill became the first where the text in both languages carried equal weight. Now, this is not a unique situation in the Commonwealth. I had the pleasure of having dinner with the Lord Chief Justice of England earlier in the year, who also happens to be a Welshman, a very proud Welshman hailing from Cardiff, who was discussing the way the Welsh Assembly in Cardiff legislate in both the Welsh language and in English. We also have a Commonwealth equivalent in the province of Quebec in Canada, and I also met the Chief Justice of Quebec, where the French language is given equal weighting and bills are simultaneously dealt with in both French and English. They're debated in the House in both languages, they're drafted in both languages, and when lawyers are interpreting them, they're given equal weight in both languages. And of course, when judges are ruling on them, the judge has to be completely fluent in both English and French, in both the common law tradition and the civil tradition derived from that French Napoleonic heritage that they also have in Canada. So it's a wonderful thing in this bicultural, multicultural country of ours that we are embracing the Indigenous language, one of New Zealand's official language, that the committee did make that recommendation that the bill be enacted in both languages. And I hope that this becomes somewhat of a precedent in this House, and that we do more and more as the capacity allows, as the fluency in te reo of judges allows, and as the ability of our legal profession to deal with two languages allows. Let's give maximum opportunity for the beautiful Te Reo Māori to be used in this way. And also, we should probably say official New Zealand Sign Language, which is an official language, the third official language of New Zealand. I better say that since the Minister of Disability Issues is in the House today. So, sir, this is a very good bill. It's uncontentious. I've taken up more than enough time to extol its virtues, and it carries my full commendation to the House.
Members, this debate is concluded. The question is that the motion be